but just using my computer speaker. Yeah, so my name is Azmina, and as Charlotte mentioned, I'm head of operations at Bloc Party. So a little bit about my background. I'm quite new to the tech startup field, so I joined Bloc Party in August, and prior to that, I spent 8 years working for MC International, and I was a researcher and policy advisor on the technology and human rights team. And I led all of their research looking at online harassment against women on Twitter, and in particular looking at the intersectional abuse that women of color and women from other marginalized communities face. So I wrote a really big report called Toxic Twitter, which brought all of those experiences and quantitative data together to try and convince Twitter to uh, strengthen their policies and their reporting processes around online harassment. So some of the stuff that I did while I was there as well was using machine learning to help classify the amount of tweets that female MPs received for the 2017 election, as well as looking at abusive tweets that were sent to female politicians and journalists in the US and the UK over a 1 year period. And the findings from that were quite shocking. So we found that Black women, for example, were 84% more likely to receive abuse than white women. So the way I got into Bloc Party was Tracy, who is the CEO of Bloc Party, actually approached me because she was building this new startup, and she was using my toxic Twitter report to actually help think of the tools that women need, but not just women, but predominantly women, unfortunately, that they need to actually have a safer, better online experience. So I started off as an advisor, leading their end user research, and now, as Charlotte mentioned, I'm the head of ops. So I do all things. Well, it's a startup of 4 people, so I do everything. Anything that's non-technical, basically. So I do legal, finance, HR, user research, product copy, branding, marketing, whatever hat I can wear. And so the way that Bloc Party came about is, so Tracy Chow, she's the CEO and founder, and she is an engineer. And she was an early engineer at Pinterest and Quora, and was also an intern at Facebook and Google. And one day she wrote a Medium post asking companies to disclose their diversity stats, because she recognized that Silicon Valley is hella white, basically. And so somehow she actually managed to get these big companies to respond, and she ended up becoming quite a big advocate for diversity and inclusion in tech. But that she was faced with loads and loads of harassment as a result, just for speaking out on these issues. So, and having a sizable following on Twitter. And she, as an engineer who's created content moderation tools, and who can build software, realized that there is a way to have a better experience online, and that she, having experience, is probably a good person to build those tools. So what Bloc Party does, is that we put the end user and the consumer at the heart of what we're building. So whereas with other social media platforms, reporting and harassment is somewhat of an afterthought, built really to make sure that when you log on to your social media platforms, your experience is safe. You don't have to see the unwanted content that you may not want to see, but also recognizing that sort of mute filters in themselves can be super helpful, but that also means that you might be missing out on really important content. So, for example, a lot of the women interviewed during the Amnesty report said that, and doing user research for Bloc Party, when you use really high level mute filters to drown out all of the harassment on social media platforms, it's good because you're not seeing a lot of the people calling you stupid and a slut and all this really mean stuff. But also, if you're like a journalist and someone's sending you a tip, all of a sudden you miss that tip because you have really high mute filters on. Or if you're a politician and one of your local constituents is, messaging you on Twitter, and you actually would like to respond to them, you miss that because you're part of the mute filters. Or if someone is sending you a death threat, you should probably know about that at the very least, and report it to the police probably. But you also miss out on that stuff. So you're missing out on potentially important and threatening stuff, all because you're trying to put your mute filter so high that you can drown out some of the harassment. So what Bloc Party tries to do is sort of fix that problem. So what we do is when you can log on to Bloc Party, you sign up for an account, and you link your Twitter account to Bloc Party. And you can turn on something called quiet mode. And quiet mode basically allows you to configure different sorts of filters to your main Twitter experience. So you can make it so that only people you hear from on Twitter are verified users, friends of friends, people that you follow, and other, and maybe I don't know other types of different configurations. Or you can make it so that, and that's quite restrictive, or you can make it less restrictive, and so you'll hear from everyone that mentions you on Twitter, except for people that don't have a profile photo, that have a new account, that have less than 10 followers. And some of these are actually filters that Twitter allows for. But the difference is that when you mute someone on Twitter, you just don't see those notifications and you don't know that they exist. But like I said, the problem is sometimes you miss out on those notifications. So what we do is we pull all of that into a lockout folder. And that lockout folder basically houses all of those muted tweets. So if for when you're in the mood to go through your muted tweets, you can do so. You can decide to unmute them. You can decide to keep them blocked. So you can decide to block them. You can move them into a sort of watch list where if it's a user that's constantly harassing you, you can keep them in there. And the other feature that we have as well is a helper feature. So one of the things that we do is a lot of people, when they receive harassment, they're inundated with thousands of notifications and all of these messages, and they don't know what to do. And sometimes to just make sure that they want to monitor their tweets, they'll either physically hand a friend over their phone, or they'll give a friend their login details and their password and say, can you just check my Twitter account for me? And what we allow is for you to add a helper and give them access to your lockout folder. So someone can have a safe and secure way to access your lockout folder, and they can take action for you on your behalf, or they can flag things for you. And it's basically a way of being a. There's a lot of times where people say, "What can I do to help?" And this is a way to actually say, "Well, here's exactly what you can do to help." So yeah, that's the party in a very quick nutshell. Charlotte, do you want me to share the screen and show a bit of the platform, or? Okay, fantastic. I was looking how to show. Yeah, share screen. Okay, 1 second. Oops. Oh, perfect. Great. I'm glad that you got to see my lady Montgomery of Wapping. Uh, always likes to make an experience. I'm very sorry. I'm so used to Zoom. I actually have no idea how to use share screen on Skype, which sounds really. Can you see anything right now or no? Oh, okay. Can you see the Bloc Party site? Oh, fantastic. Okay, cool. So this is just the landing page, but like I said, this is just a summary of Bloc Party. So yeah, so it just highlights the main features here, which is that you get to choose who you want to hear from. So you can filter out the people who are more likely to send you unwanted content on Twitter. So like I said, you can filter out people like friends of friends, verified users, people I've replied to. The tweets that you can see here are all tweets that are sent to Tracy, who is the CEO of Bloc Party. So this one here is actually someone that sent us a tweet when we were advertising a post for Bloc Party, which is slightly ironic. And then the review and take action is the lockout folder, like I mentioned. So over here, the block, unmute, or dismiss are all functions that you can take in your lockout folder. And this is a little bit more about having a friend help out in our helper mode. So, oops, let me see. Right, so this is my Bloc Party. So I'm logged into Bloc Party at the moment. And so this is what it looks like when you log in. So at the top over here, I'm a helper for 3 people. So at the top are all of the people who I'm a helper for, and then I can switch to see their lockout folders and their Bloc Party accounts. And then this is my sort of main Bloc Party experience. I guess luckily no one has tweeted much at me today. So if I go into my lockout folder, at the moment they haven't had to mute anybody, but any of the tweets that they've had to mute because of the filters that I put on would appear here. And then anyone that I have dismissed, so people that I want to keep muted, but I just have taken out of my main experience are here. And then people that I have blocked or unmuted are here. So I can show you an example of, yeah, so people that are obviously, people that are replying to a job post that meet the filters that I have, but I wouldn't want to miss a job post, someone that's responding to a job post just because they have less than 10 followers. So this way I'm able to go through those accounts and say, oh, actually they're fine, so I can unmute them. But the folks that are saying mean things, like you saw on the landing page, I don't have to hear from them again because I can keep that user muted. So yeah, that's the lockout folder. So when you log on, you'll be asked to configure your quiet mode. I should mention that we have just launched our beta product. So you were one of the very first people to see this. So we're constantly iterating and improving. So we're redoing this whole page actually because some people had given us some feedback on that. But basically, when you link to Bloc Party and you link your Twitter account, the first thing you're asked to do is to turn on quiet mode. And so these are the filters that you get to choose from and save. And these are the filters that we then apply to your main Twitter experience. So once you apply your filters here, you use Twitter as normal. And then it's only when and if you're in the mood to go through your lockout folder that you can come onto Bloc Party and see what's happening, basically. So I can give you a good example of helper mode. So now I've signed into Tracy, who's our CEO. I've signed into her helper. I've signed into her lockout folder in her account. So I'm now viewing Bloc Party as a helper. She gets a lot of harassment. She's Asian American, so in the last few days she's gotten a lot of harassment because she's Asian and because of the coronavirus, and there's just been a lot of racism because of that. So I can basically, so she's given me permission to take action on any of the content in her lockout folder. So I can block someone for her, I can unmute people that I think are okay, I can dismiss them, and I can also flag them for her review. So for example, this gentleman over here is obsessed with Tracy. She has a few stalkers, and he thinks that she is having an affair with James Comey, the FBI director. So on a daily basis, he tweets at her about her and James Comey having an affair. And this is cross-platform harassment that she gets. So before with just Twitter, she would just mute the person, but now with Bloc Party, she mutes them, but she's able to keep an eye on them. Every time that she had blocked them in the past, he would just create a new account and it would rile him up. So now she just keeps him muted, but monitors the account. So, and then you can look at people that she's blocked over here. Yeah, you can't be racist against white people. How is Tracy Chow less privileged than an unemployed guy from West Virginia again? So yeah, cool it with the anti-Semitism. She gets a lot of crap. She's not anti-Semitic. I should point that out. But yeah, so that's basically how help review works. So I'm able to go through and basically help sort out Tracy's Twitter experience. And as someone with 100,000 followers that's doing a lot of good work on diversity and inclusion in tech, and as a result gets harassment, it's a really concrete way that I can help her. So yeah, so that's Bloc Party as it is right now. And then one of the other things that we're building as well is something called a report builder. So it's something that we're in the middle of creating, but it's basically an easy way for someone who experiences online harassment across platforms to compile reports of that abuse. So to upload screenshots, to share images, to provide descriptions, and then we compile all of that. So whether that's text message, email, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we compile all of that and we turn it into a secure and shareable PDF link that you can share with law enforcement. So that's something that we'll be rolling out very soon. But yeah, I can leave it at that and see if there's any questions or comments.
Congratulations on it. It's
amazing.
Yeah, amazing. People, you probably couldn't hear, but people are nodding and saying amazing.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. That's great.
I was just gonna ask if we could save all the screenshots because they could delete it. Like they could, like say, like there's a maybe someone tweeted and like maybe like week later they can tweet the like abusing. So, but she's already working on compiling, so I think that's great.
Right. Did you hear that?
It was a bit muffled. If you don't mind repeating it, Charlotte.
Wondering like, because some people could like comment really mean things about someone and they could delete it like a month later, realizing it could be like, oh, like what if I get in trouble or something. But you said you're already working on like saving all those, like taking screenshot and making it into PDF. that's like, yeah, that really need to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, at the moment, our biggest risk, I suppose, is that so we also save deleted tweets, which is totally against Twitter's API. So our biggest risk of being shut down is Twitter saying that we aren't following the rules of their API. Hopefully that won't happen because we're trying to help solve harassment on their platform. So at the moment, we also all of the tweets that get saved in the lockout folder are saved and they're screen captured even if that person deletes the tweet or the user closes their account, which is actually really helpful when you're experiencing harassment because lots of people will create accounts and then, like you said, like a month later, shut that account, create a new one, and then all of that harassment is that the evidence of that is lost. So that's one of the things that we are trying to capture as well is that especially when you want to file a police report, you need, and then people aren't always happy, or the law isn't always happy with screenshots because it can be so easily photoshopped. So, it's definitely a tricky point that we're trying to work around, right? So the way we work around it is by breaking Twitter's API rules, basically, but hopefully we can solve that issue.
I mean, this is like amazing platform, but you guys not like just focusing on Twitter. Are you planning to like expand it to Instagram and other social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, so Instagram will definitely be the next platform, especially because like celebrities, influencers of all types, experience so much abuse. So I'm like a big Love Island fan, and I'm always like shocked at how abusive people are after an episode of Love Island. Like the stuff that they say on Instagram, and the death threats and the open abuse, and especially for women, and the horrible misogynistic comments about women's bodies. And actually, I remember when I was just an advisor, I was telling Tracy that help review would be really, really amazing for for Love Island contestants because they basically go to the villa and give their Instagram accounts to a friend to manage. So, instead of having to give up your credentials, you can actually go and have someone filter through your account and in a sort of safer and more secure way. So yeah, definitely Instagram. There's obviously new platforms like TikTok. There's Facebook pages. It's one of the things that we'd also like to introduce is not just your public tweets, but also your DMs as well in terms of pulling that into the lockout folder. We also want to explore machine learning to help, at least do a sort of soft categorization of tweets that are more likely to be abusive than non-abusive as well, or more likely to be sexist or racist or some different types of categorization.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I'm just curious how I don't know much about coding, but I'm just curious what program do you use to code this whole thing and just a bit technical, but yeah.
Yes, that's a great question. I'm like, I've been doing recruitment for engineers. So, like, are you talking about like the software that we use to build it, like the stack, the tech stack? Yeah. Okay, we'll try and remember all of it. So I know we're mainly Python. We use GraphQL, React, Render is one. I can come back to you with the full tech stack. I have a political science degree. I am like really struggling to answer. Yeah, we use a whole suite of different tech stack, but I can come back and give you the whole list of that. I can share it with Charlotte and share that with you.
Yeah.
One thing that really stuck out in my mind from the conversation we had before, Azmina, was the story you told me about the woman who had tweeted a politician and the politician blocked her.
Oh yeah.
I just thought that was really interesting because it's a kind of reversal of this idea of blocking, where the blocking is actually discriminatory.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a case in Canada, and I think there's been a couple of legal cases brought in the U.S. as well. But I actually interviewed the woman, but she was basically tweeting at a very high-level minister in Canada. I think it was prior to the elections, or it was, a busy political time, I suppose. And she was questioning him on his record on certain issues, particularly gender issues and feminist issues, and he blocked her. And she actually took him to court for violating her freedom of expression. And I think I can't remember exactly the outcome of the case, But I believe that now politicians and people who are public figures have to be a lot less liberal with the block button as a result, because the online space is seen as a way for constituents and for the media to, not just the media, but everyday people to have conversations with people in, significant power. So it's interesting in that sense, because obviously it was, an older white man shutting down a woman who was asking him about gender issues. But in other cases, it might also mean that when you are, AOC, for example, and you're receiving a lot of horrific, tweets, that using the block button actually might not be the best option. And on Twitter as well, it's important to note that when you block someone, they know when you've blocked them. When you mute someone, they don't know that they've been muted. So a lot of politicians use the mute button more than the block button, which is why actually something like Bloc Party can be really helpful, because it helps you configure those mute filters in a way that I think ideally improves your user experience. So not just getting notifications, but having them exist on Twitter is not the most helpful, but being able to actually mute users versus just individual tweets is what Bloc Party does. And then obviously being able to find those when you need to is super helpful, I hope.
Hearing from Caroline Sinders about she created this matrix. I don't know if you've seen it, of types of abuse, and when she's kind of created a scale from when the abuse is like casual to illegal.
Yeah.
And she gives the example of Trump and how the way that we have to understand and kind of process what he's tweeting as the president is completely different from before, when he was not the president.
Yeah.
So like and I think that completely relates to what you're talking about, the social status of the person in question.
Absolutely.
Completely frames what is and isn't acceptable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's exactly it. And it's, I mean, even political, I mean, if you look at it from like a human rights perspective, which is like my background, people who are like public figures, for example, should be subjected to a higher threshold of when they are of criticism, because of the public power that they possess, that they hold. But I think it's interesting, though, on the flip side, because I've spent so much of my time looking at how women and women of color who are public figures are treated online, that that category of commentary and debate or constructive criticism turns into misogyny and abuse all the time, and very, very quickly. And one of the things that I always struggled with was when I was writing the Toxic Twitter report, was when all of these women would be told to shut up and go back to the kitchen, because that's not technically a violation of someone's freedom of expression. That's just that's protected expression. But when someone is receiving that over and over and over and over again, if hundreds of people are telling you to shut up and to go back to the kitchen and go make them a cup of tea, that does have an impact on how you then use social media platforms. So it was interesting to see how many people used mute filters as a way to drown out that commentary, and as a way to help empower themselves to be able to use these platforms, while it's not, blocking anybody, but at least not having to deal with all the crap out there, the crap that's out there. So I think it's like these platforms have to maintain freedom of expression and make sure that people are allowed to freely express themselves, even if other people might disagree with that. But then it's also about recognizing that a lot of the content that's out there that people are disagreeing with is also laced or embedded with misogyny or racism or casual sexism. And what's the best way to make sure that all of that content isn't driving the most marginalized voices off the internet? And I think that's what Bloc Party is trying to do. We're just trying to come up with practical tools to help people speak out freely online and safely.
And it's also, I guess, for me, another kind of flip side of the power status thing is that people who are trolling and don't have any political power are partly doing it because they have no political power and they're frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
So and you can see that people that do have political power have a stake in not being seen to do these things. They might harbour horrible sentiments, but know that they have to limit what they do publicly, whereas somebody that is just like in their bedroom angry, they have no filter.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no filter and there's no accountability at all, right? I think that's the problem. And I've written a lot about what social media platforms should do, and I think there's still a lot more that they can do in terms of the reporting systems that are out there, in terms of actually taking action, in terms of transparency, because the problem is that when these people that have no power are using and arming themselves, with Twitter to exert that power, it is having a really detrimental effect because these people are targeting the most marginalized voices online. So there's a lot more that the platforms can do about enforcing their own rules about what's allowed and what's not allowed on the platform, and just being a lot more transparent about that as well.
So we're in the business of creating chatbots this week. And I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on what is the potential of a conversational interface to help people that are experiencing this problem, or to engage other stakeholders in this space.
Yeah. So I was having to think about this before the chat today. I think there's a few. The biggest area that I think that there's like a sort of gap that maybe a conversational interface can help address is like just knowledge about the laws and policies related to online harassment. Um, so, for example, if you are experiencing harassment online, it is really difficult to understand or know or find out whether the harassment you're experiencing meets a legal threshold of harassment laws in your country. So and I think the reason why it's difficult for a few reasons. One, because these are sort of still seen to be new ways of experiencing harassment. So in a lot of ways, countries haven't caught up with online tools for harassment. Um, but it's also just people don't necessarily know where to go. They don't know if someone telling them to shut up and go back to the kitchen constitutes harassment. They also may question whether or not someone saying "I'm going to kill you later" constitutes harassment simply because it's online. So I think that something that is educational, or something that helps people or guides people to the information that exists out there about the laws in their country around harassment, is actually quite helpful. And that can also be split into two ways, because there's sort of this like stranger abuse from people that you don't know that are anonymous online, and the laws around that. And then there's also intimate partner violence and domestic violence, or when you have like a stalker. And the laws around that are really different because it falls under like domestic violence laws, in terms of harassment. And I just think that even as someone that spent 2 years researching this, if someone were to say, "Can you lead towards some resources about the laws related to online harassment in the UK," I'd have to be like, "Oh yeah, sure," and then probably go down a bit of a Google rabbit hole and then pull out something. So if there was a way for someone to just understand whether the content they were receiving or not was harassing, and the legal opportunities they may or may not have, I think that would be super helpful in terms of just knowledge. And then the same around social media policies. They're really confusing. This they kind of they're split up into really random different ways, and a lot of the time people experience harassment online and they don't know whether to report it, how to report it, what the best way to report it is. So if you want to report something on Twitter, you have to answer like 6 different questions. It would be really great to have someone that would be able to suggest to you, based on the content that you want to report, the best way to report a piece of abuse or a content to a platform to get the best outcome, for example. Just so that when they're going, because a lot of people that I've spoken to have talked about the reporting process as traumatic, because you're reliving the abuse, right? You not only have to see it, you then have to go through the process of reporting it and then tracking that report. So if there's just some way to simplify the reporting process, not from the platform end, but from giving the person who's experiencing abuse the support that they need, I think that would be super helpful. And then there's just like a general support, positivity. I think you guys have spoken to Shay, and I'm sure she spoke about like online bystander intervention, but it can be a really lonely feeling and process to go through online harassment, especially when you're getting dogpiled or flooded with abuse. So is there anything that can make that person feel less alone? Whether that's even something as simple as sharing the facts that a quarter of women in the UK have experienced online abuse, and that jumps to a third when you're under the age of 25, or 50% of women have reported experiencing psychological distress as a result of online abuse. But something to sort of really communicate that their experience is valid, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed or distressed by it, I think would be really helpful.
At the moment, if people are interested in trying to guide people through the reporting process, what would you say is like the best resource that explains it as best it can? So at the moment, like where would
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to go to the platform's policies. I wouldn't say that they're the best, but they are the most up to date and accurate, because the platforms are always changing it, which is one of the problems. So, for example, in the 18 months that I was researching Twitter's harassment policies, hateful conduct policies, I think they changed like 3 times. So it's just constantly like, so everything I was writing was then like, oh, they've changed this word or they added this, and so. Yeah, so I think go to the platform policy, and then just be aware that they do update them. But that is one of the, like, when's the last time anyone in the room read a harassment policy or was prompted by a social media platform that they had updated their policy? There's no education or prompts to users to understand the rules around their platform. So I think that's a gap.
I found something the other day that had advice by platform about how to report stuff. So I'll find it and I'll share it, because it's like it had already tried to do this.
Yeah.
It usually, the documentation's just in a text format, so I think it's really interesting to think about how you could deliver that in a conversation.
Yeah. I think
especially in a way where that allows you to bring the emotional support that you're talking about in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I just think like there's so many times where I've reported something and I'm like, oh, what do I need? Like, do I report this as like harassment? Or like, so sometimes people will report and they'll just be like, this is offensive instead of this is like abusive, because of the terminology that's used by Twitter in their reporting system. And then anytime you click this is offensive, they'll say, oh, sorry to hear that. We suggest you block this user. So in order to report, you have to go back. You have to go back through the entire process again, and all of a sudden people might just be like, okay, this is a waste of my time. So if there's something that's actually like, anytime you report something as offensive, they're not actually going to accept the report. That's probably really helpful for people to know so that they don't waste their time. Or if it's racist, we suggest that you report it under this. If it's a threat to life, we suggest you report under this. Something like that just prompts people.
A good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's really hard to define what online harassment can be, because sometimes I will just read tweets that maybe they're not to me or they're not addressed to me, but they will piss me off,
Yeah.
Like I've been reading this all sorts of crazy stuff about Shakira and J-Lo,
Yeah.
like either both
Yeah.
in good and bad ways. So I don't know. I guess it's really hard to put a line on what you can actually start to see and not see, because it's so thin. It's not like people are saying bad words or using racist terms or whatever, but just the way that, I don't know. So it's quite difficult, the job that you're doing, honestly.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think with anything that if you build anything like that, you almost have to go to like look at the more extreme cases. So look at the more extreme cases where it is blatantly racist or blatantly violent or blatantly targeting a marginalized group, and look at what Twitter's reporting system allows you to report, and then categorize that, because there's so much of the gray stuff out there. It's really confusing. Twitter itself has no consistency or no understanding of what it does and doesn't allow with the gray stuff, but there is stuff like threatening content, for example, that is clearly not allowed on the platform. So I guess my advice would be focus on the content that's easiest to categorize, because it's really easy to get lost in the gray area, and it's kind of just sometimes it's just frustrating, and then you feel like it's just too much to try and tackle. But there's a lot out there that exists that is clearly platform violations or even sometimes illegal content that's out there. So I would focus on that, would be my big advice.
The site, Azmina, is called reportharmfulcontent.com.
Oh, right, okay.
And it has for Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Blogger, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, it has guidance. I mean, given the fact it's got Blogger, I feel like it might be a bit old.
Yeah.
But still, you know, it's...
I think that's good. I mean, any resource out there that exists is good. I think for me, the biggest thing with the platforms is that they're just constantly updating, and then is someone actually sitting there and updating and making sure that whoever is looking at that website is given the most up to date advice.
It would be really cool if you were designing a chatbot that gives you notifications when the platform makes a change.
Yeah.
To their policy.
Yeah, exactly. And just like tips as well, like, so I know, for example, I think you were saying that you report stuff that you saw like around JLo and Shakira, but so a lot of the time Twitter will deprioritize content that's been reported by third parties, so on behalf of someone else, which kind of goes against the principle of like it being a community where if you see harassment, you should report it on someone else's behalf, so they don't have the burden of having to report, because that content is then deprioritized in terms of reports. So yeah, sometimes like if I see harassment and it's really bad, I'll literally lie and say that I'm experiencing the harassment, because I know that in the Twitter queues of reports that it means that it'll get prioritized more. So I mean, I'm not advocating for you guys to lie to the people that, or, you know, to tell people to lie in their reports, but I think it's just interesting to know more about how these platforms functions and how they prioritize and deprioritize reports, and which reports they prioritize more and which they prioritize less.
Do you feel like with Bloc Party, do you have a sense of how much people will volunteer to help?
Yeah, it's a good question. So like I said, we've only launched our beta product for 1 week. So Charlotte was one of the first few beta product testers for us, actually. And I think one of the things we're trying to do is really create a community out of it. So I think at first it might be that, you know, if you have a trusted friend or you're a politician and you have an intern, those might be the people that will work as sort of helpers, quote unquote. But I would imagine and I would hope that the more high profile figures that we get, the more people will actually want to be able to lend a hand, or also just people in certain communities. So, you know, if you're a trans activist that gets a load of abuse, and you have followers, and you know, whether from trans people themselves or allies who want to help, you know, you would hope that if someone says, "Oh, I've just joined Bloc Party. There's this feature. I get a crap load of abuse. I would love someone to help me, you know, sort through my lockout folder." That people see it as a really tangible way to help and can sign up. And I think we're trying to build that community out of Bloc Party as well, so that it's not just the people who experience abuse that are on there, but also all of the really good people in the world that actually want to create safe spaces and would love to volunteer some of their time so that those who are being marginalized and excluded can try and participate more.
Amazing. Does anyone have any last questions? Okay, we have one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just wondering, I mean, I just want to know about your opinion on that, not really like, I just want to know what you think of it, but why is that companies like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram don't have things like Bloc Party already kind of available for their platform? What do they have to get from it? Like, my question is, why is it not changing, basically? Where do you think it's coming from?
Try and be politically correct in my answer here. So I think a lot of it is just prioritization. So they are platforms that are trying to make money, and dealing with harassment at the scale that it needs to be dealt with would mean removing a lot of people, a lot of active users from their platforms. And when your shareholders and your profits are based on active monthly users, sort of having that scourge of users that are toxic on your platform isn't very good for your profit and your sort of outlook on the stock market. So a lot of it is capitalism, I think. I think some of it is also, there is a big gray area around online harassment, in terms of stuff that's legal, stuff that's not legal. And actually, I think that something like Bloc Party is actually better built from a third party like us, because we are not the platform, so we don't need to have to balance that freedom of expression for all versus hate speech versus violence. We are just like, we are literally building something for you as the end user, and you can go and you can configure those filters, and you can, and it's cross-platform, so it's not just Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, as we'll continue to build. And so we don't have to sort of reach that sort of policy level consensus that, like, working in a tech startup, you need to have the product designers on board, eng on board, policy on board. Everyone has to agree that it's a good idea, prioritize, and at least it's too big to prioritize. It's almost like, because everything was an afterthought, it's just so much harder to go back and address it and get consensus on it. Whereas like with us as a third party, it's actually just a lot easier because we have the lived experience, we know, and I think we're just coming at it from a right mindset. So, for example, we have 2FA, like two-factor authentication, mandatory, and that's because like user security is important to us. And if we have access to your Twitter account or you're giving a helper access to your Twitter account, we want to make sure that every time they access Bloc Party, that there's 2FA enabled and that we are setting a higher threshold of account security. People might find that annoying, but for us, that's just implementing security by design. Same way as obviously we're building something that is, anti-abuse by design, where we're just thinking about anti-harassment and all the different ways that we can address the issue. But even as we build a community, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that harassment doesn't appear on Bloc Party of all places? And I just think that those conversations weren't had at the platforms until much, much, much later, when they were called out, by influencers in the media.
Really love to see a data visualization of the number of users that would be removed if we removed them, and that how much that would cost the platform.
Yeah, but also that information only the platform really has it.
Do you think you could estimate that though? Do you think you could estimate the number of people you'd have to take off?
It's so you could look at their transparency reports and see the number of reports that were made for like abusive content, and then the number of actions taken. But there's such little transparency around that. I think YouTube and Facebook, to be honest, are a little bit better, but it's hard because, like someone just said, like that's all data the platform has.
Like, when you said the chatbot, maybe actually like trying to engage with the people who are working for those companies, and actually trying to like basically, instead of like tackling the issue from the outside, actually tackling it from the inside, which has been kind of done lately with Google, and they've had a lot of issues with sexual harassment. But like maybe tackling it through the inside it's almost like the only way to make them change, instead of, I mean, you guys are doing amazing work obviously, but it's crazy that you guys can make this and they can't apply it to their platform when you guys have done this. It's just like,
yeah, I mean, literally 2 engineers that have done this. So obviously it's, and that's a lot of it's political will, right? Like, of course these companies could build this if they wanted to, if they really, really wanted to, but
at Google, where those 2 engineers got fired because five engineers got fired at Google because they built like a really little tool that helped them see their workers' rights or something like that. I think it was just a tiny little plugin, and then they all got sacked.
And they're actually encouraged to build that kind of stuff in the company, and they get recognized for doing that. But when Google didn't like the reason it was done, they just got rid. But I do think that engineers or people working in big tech are a very interesting stakeholder group to design for.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people want to help. A lot of people recognize the problem. A lot of people weigh up whether they can have more impact inside or outside the companies. So I think it's definitely an interesting group to explore, especially as someone that's leading on all of the hiring of engineers. The number of people that apply for Bloc Party just because they're like, I want to take my skills and have work somewhere with a mission that I agree with and that I could support. I think that's becoming increasingly important for technical people in the tech industry. So I think that's definitely something to consider. Cool. And just to plug before I leave, we are looking for beta product testers for Bloc Party. So I would love the feedback from all of you guys on Bloc Party. I can send you invite links and you can sign up. There's obviously some things that we are improving, like our onboarding flow, the quiet mode filters that I had mentioned. We're trying to simplify everything based on the feedback that we've had over the last week. But I can share my email address with Charlotte. But I would love the feedback from you guys on usability, or if you have experienced harassment yourself, and if you want to use Bloc Party and tell us how it works out for you, whether you think it's helpful or not, that would be really, really great, because obviously we are still very early and we just want to make sure at the end of the day that we're building something that has value for our users. So yeah, I'll share that information with Charlotte, and please do get in touch, or if I can reach out to you proactively, I can do that as well.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Great. Thank you all, and good luck.
Thanks a lot. See you soon. Thanks.